Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Peter Sharples.
Mr. Speaker, the Māori Party is pleased to acknowledge the initiatives in Budget 2013 that are aimed at addressing some of the inequalities present in our society. I'm talking about the many announcements that have been made across all portfolios which focus on increasing our housing supply, upgrading housing standards, addressing educational achievement, addressing health inequities, addressing the issue of unemployment, and many more. These issues directly tie into the drivers and symptoms of poverty. It is one of the nation's greatest shames that as a first world, highly privileged country, we continue to have great levels of disparity and marked inequitable outcomes for many of our whānau. It was for this very reason that when the Māori Party was invited to become a partner to this government, we placed a high priority on addressing the needs of our most vulnerable whānau and citizens. We pushed to establish a ministerial committee on poverty, and today, as Budget 2013 has shown, we are heartened by the commitment made by all ministers across the House who put their money where their mouths were and delivered for our low-income whānau. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that ultimately there are two primary fronts on which we must tackle this issue if we are to address this in the long term. That is through education and training, and secondly, supporting people into jobs. I am particularly pleased with the announcement already made by Tariana and Minister Joyce that 3,000 trade training placements will be established for Māori and Pacifica peoples. Not only is this initiative about upskilling people and encouraging them into skilled trade positions, it will go a long way towards addressing the disparity in the unemployment rate between Māori and Pacific and the rest of the country. While the unemployment figures are showing a downward trend, both the Māori and Pacific unemployment rate remain at an unacceptable level, more than twice that the rest of the people of our nation. Māori unemployment sits at 13.9% and Pacifica unemployment at 15.2%. And before anyone in this House is quick to point the finger on this, I would remind everyone that Māori and Pacifica unemployment has been an issue for many generations. Whenever there has been a recession, a downward trend in the economy, or job cuts at a major factory, it is usually the Māori and Pacifica people who are the most vulnerable, often the first off and the last back on to work. So I'm pleased to tell this House that Budget 2013 has extended the Māori Affairs cadetships, and it's all very well for Winston to say another 100 cadetships to 350 a year, which has proven to get results in not only getting people into work, but keeping them in jobs and moving up the ladder. The program, since it's been initiated in 2009, 87% of those participants have remained in permanent employment, long past the initial cadetship program, which lasts only 6 months. And a further 9% have gone on to further study. So over the next 4 years, our cadetship program will assist 1,400 Māori people into work, and that is something that I'm really proud to support. But let me tell you something else about our trades training and cadetship programs. What makes these programs successful is not only finding jobs, it's providing support, mentoring, pastoral care, training and networks. Both of these programs are marked by a 360-degree program of support, and that is how it should be if we want to build resilience in our communities. Trade training has a special place in the minds and hearts of many Māori. Through the 1960s through to 1980s, thousands of young Māori were enrolled into the Māori trade training schemes of the time. These programs were run out of the then Department of Māori Affairs, TPK, and were one of the most successful Māori work programs ever run in New Zealand. Those who participated in these programs were taught skills and trades that kept them employed for the rest of their lives. These skills they learned also supported them to put kai on the table, to support their tamariki and whānau, to participate in our communities. And ultimately, people remember these times as some of the happiest in our collective history. Whānau from throughout New Zealand participated in these programs. Many of them were sent to other rohe to learn their trades, and ultimately many of them settled in these new regions, such as in Christchurch and in Auckland, where trade training schemes were run. These stories of migration of those who had moved from one rohe to another are remembered in our stories, in our whakapapa, and in our history. To this day, I still come across people in whānau who have been part of the scheme. For example, while in Christchurch, helping to establish He Toki Ki Te Reka, the first modern-day trade training program down there, the old trade trainees who are now employers and managers of building companies came in to support the program and formed a group that would help young Māori into employment. In fact, whenever I go down to Christchurch and see someone who's lived there for a long time, Māori, I just ask them if they're from my place, from Kahungunu, because many of Kahungunu people now reside there. I wanted to remember this history, and I wanted the House to hear this proud history, because this is no longer something nostalgic. This is something that this government is working towards making real again. I particularly want to acknowledge the work that Ngāi Tahu have done in establishing He Toki Ki Te Reka in Christchurch after the earthquakes. Their trade training model, which enrolled the support of the construction industry, iwi, te puni kōkiri, community providers, marae and educational institutions, was really ingenious, and I acknowledge them for their leadership in Māori trade training. I don't know if it was by design or destiny or what, but Christchurch was one of the original sites of the old Māori trade training programs, and I remember when Ngāi Tahu launched He Toki Ki Te Reka, it was a reminder of the great legacy that they had been part of, and indeed that we as Māori people from across the country had been part of. I also want to acknowledge the Minister of Finance, the Honourable Bill English, for his role as the chair of our Ministerial Committee for Poverty, because of the outcomes that have come out from that, and I've lost the last page, so I'll just talk it. Because 60 million for Te Reo Māori initiatives is major. 100 million for housing warm-up projects is major. Diabetes, 35 million. Hold on. Listen to what I'm saying. Flavel's on the road, and so is Tareana. We've got a by-election going, mate. It's all right. Steady. You can't go on the road in the same place, can you? Diabetes, 35 million. Rheumatic fever, another 21 million. 21 million added to the 24 million which we already achieved. Extending the house sizes, 3,000 houses, that's $2.9 billion. You see, the thing about the Māori Party is not just going in there for things for Māori culture, it's about seeing needs for New Zealanders, sitting at the table and boring in and getting support for these projects. So a lot of these projects have come from us being there and present at the table and pushing the case for New Zealand. Kia ora tātou.
I call Honi Hauera.
Mr. Speaker. Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. Tēnā tātou katoa e te whare. Mr. Speaker, in 2011 I made Feed the Kids Mana's first ever major campaign, but I found that whenever I raised it around the House, I noticed that while we all know that child poverty exists, politicians were retreating behind glib phrases or saying nasty things about bad parenting or blaming the global financial crisis or going quiet to fit with the party line and refusing to deal honestly and openly with what has become a major disgrace in 21st century Aotearoa. And unfortunately, whenever they're in government, both major parties struggle to admit that child poverty is a problem, but happily attack those in power about it as soon as they go into the opposition. So wouldn't it be nice, Mr. Speaker, if for once, just this once, both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition called a joint press conference, and yes, Russell Norman and Matiria Tude and Winston Peters and Tariana Turia and Peter Sharples and even Peter Dunn can be there too if they wish to say